Eagle 6 in the track.
Roger.
Viper 1 bombs away. 1's going to climb high above 20. You're south.
Eagle 6 radar contact. Eagle 6 is visual.
And it goes left.
Hello and welcome back to the DCS SITREP, which is the new show on all things DCS World related. DCS, of course, is the world's premier combat flight simulator for the home PC right now, and it is produced by Eagle Dynamics and its third-party affiliates. In today's show, we look at ED's announcement on bug-fixing improvements, AI ground and air AI improvements, terrain optimizations, and what they're describing as an impressive number of improvements coming to both the Hornet and the Viper. This will be part of an upcoming DCS update, likely next week, as typically patches come at the end of the month. Now, the team advised that a variety of bug fixes, new features, and optimizations will benefit multiplayer in particular, which a lot of you have bemoaned about the lack of support in server/multiplayer environments. So ED kicked off their list with ground and aircraft AI, which they said will include fixes and improvements to both aircraft and ground AI behavior. For aircraft, issues such as cargo doors on the AI Mi-8 helicopter remaining open during transportation tasks and helicopters having difficulty landing will be fixed. The carpet bombing task will work correctly when a priority target is set and weapons free. Additionally, fighters will perform better in cruise missile interception scenarios. For ground AI, bridge crossing is being improved along with route following behavior. This is a discussion that's come up before as part of their dynamic campaign discussions. They went on to say that the BTR-80 and the BTR-82 will deploy a bow wave shield when crossing water. So stay tuned, they said, for the upcoming changelog, which no doubt will be more comprehensive in the list of things that they're going to introduce. They went on to say that weapon behavior will also see several important fixes, particularly for the AIM-54C's lock reacquisition issue. AI units will properly use the APKWS rockets. Additionally, the R-27R and ER missiles will be adjusted to track cruise missiles effectively, and a new China Asset Pack edition will introduce the HJ-12 anti-tank guided missile, or ATGM. Other improvements will include updates to the Sea Eagle missile, which will have a collision model that can be intercepted. And lastly in the list was mentioned the terrain engine, which will receive notable optimizations, including better VRAM usage. This is pretty huge news, I think. Disk streaming and CPU utilization for rendering scenery models. This enhances performance across maps, especially in VR, which will be great news for VR users, and exciting news. Additionally, issues like crashes at mission start in certain maps, like, for example, Afghanistan, Kola, and Sinai, and graphical artifacts when zooming in or panning in map modes have been addressed. So these optimizations will contribute to a smoother and more stable gameplay experience, especially in complex and processor-intensive situations. I presume they mean where there's low-level situations going on, where there's a lot of units needing to be rendered and physics-intensive stuff all being modeled in the game. So we'll see how that pans out with this next patch. Now, other important improvements will also include cargoes no longer being destroyed when dropped, improved oil and water leak effects for World War II aircraft, and the Arleigh-Burke close-in weapon system use against missiles is also improved. As I said, the team advised that these details are some of the many highlights that will be covered also in this upcoming changelog. So typically the updates, as I said, come at the end of the month, so we should see something next week, and I expect it'll probably be a fairly decent patch just on those portions of the discussion alone. Now, while we talk about map improvements, I'm aware from Orbix that they have a number of updates to inject into their Kola Peninsula map, as we discussed last week with some of the pretty exciting looking renderings that they showed of updates that are coming. So they let me know this week too that if you subscribe to their newsletter, you will go into the running to win one of 3 maps. I'll post a link for that login page in the video description below. Check that out if you want to go in the draw for one of the maps. Now, as I said last week, the team did showcase those pretty amazing pictures of the work going on in map development in the game, so stay tuned for more on that, as I know some of the teams are working really hard with ED's TDK system to bring as much realism as they can supply, given the limitations of that particular kit and what it's capable of producing. Remember too, a lot of the teams are having to reproduce and build unique objects and features of the particular maps that they are showcasing. We saw this particularly with Sinai, with a lot of really interesting stuff, as well as what Kola produced as well. So we don't have, when the game initially was being produced, a lot of similarity or repetition. They are trying to get more unique objects in there and more realistic renderings of the areas that we're flying over, especially at low level. Now, ED spent some time honing in on recent updates and bug fixes across various aircraft in this last newsletter, including they described the F-16C and also the FA-18C. These are going to be part of their ongoing commitment to refining the simulation and completing all release and post-early access support commitments. This always generates a certain amount of frustration, if you like, or complaints from various community members that these aircraft, despite being sort of in the game for 4 to 5 years, at least in the case of the F-18, are still being worked on. This is the nature of this particular beast when you get these aircraft that are massively detailed and complex and mimics in some ways some of the work that's gone on to actually produce them, decades ago. And of course, aircraft also receive things like midlife updates and so on and so forth as technology improves. So they're not static. There's always something going on, and that will be the case as the game continues to evolve, unfortunately. Now, we have addressed, they say, a wide range of issues, from minor graphical glitches or more significant systems-related bugs that affect gameplay, which should be good news. The Viper, for example, will see improvements in its radar, including fixes to track while scan, or TWS, multi-designations, more reliable soft locks and range while scan, RWS, and dual track modes, adding the ability to interact with false targets, corrected hotlines, and improved pulse Doppler tracking. For ground pounders, Maverick slaving to the sensor point of interest issues will be addressed. That will be good news there. Now, one of the biggest and most requested changes is the ability to select the flight control system dead zone gradient to either a realistic setting based on best used for force sensitive joysticks, or to exactly match the controls manager dead zone value. Now, you will should be able to select this in the next update. That'll be a bonus for those running the systems mimicking the real stick, but also those with an interest in force feedback, which is now starting to make a renewed appearance in flight simulation. Has been there for a while. Some of the older sticks still available right back to the 1990s, but this will be welcome news for some of the new sticks coming out that have been showcased recently. Now, despite being out of early access, remember that the F-18 has and will continue to be supported, as I hinted before, with new features and fixtures. Now, in this next update, the Hornet will receive updates to its avionics and weapon systems. These updates are based on player feedback, which is good that people are still providing productive feedback to the ED team, and of course extensive testing. They include things like adjustments to the radar BIAS behavior, the joint helmet mounted queuing system, and training missions, fuses, and more. So they say stay tuned for the full change log. I'm looking forward to seeing what they have plugged in there. Now, although not ready, unfortunately, for this next update, they also said that the F-18C is going to get an extensive review and rework of the flight model and flight control system. This is something that has been discussed for a while. Back in, I think earlier in the year, Wags talked about this with Mover and Gonki. Other F-18C features are still planned for the project, like more multi-sensor integration or MSI features, loft symbology, and data for JDAM and JSOW and the Mark 77. So pretty exciting news there. It's good to see those aircraft still getting plenty of attention. As I said, they have been out for quite a while, and I know that there is still, as I said, a little bit of lingering frustration from some members of the community looking for more work on those aircraft. But I'm very, very interested to see how long it's going to take them to rework that flight model for the F-18 and how it's going to interact with work around the boat with the supercarrier module as well. Now, while we talk about modules, don't forget that the end of the summer sale ends on September 30th. This will feature up to 50% off some items, and they also mentioned here 30% off aircraft like the Apache, the Hornet, the Viper, and remember the Black Shark 3. So some great modules there, some really good deals. That sale is also available on Steam as part of the Planes, Trains, and Automobiles Fest, but that one ends on the 23rd, so just a short time away. Now, there were a few commentators who elected to see this sale, I guess, as a money grab by ED, which I have some trouble grasping some of the logic from some members of the community here. ED posts regular sales at certain points in the year, which is a common business practice, although a lot of people also criticize the business practice. How much of that is genuinely fair, I don't know. They have a complicated, if you like, business model, not typical of a lot of video game companies. But certainly this is a great way to help generate revenue, which is part of any business's thrust, remember. So while the modules are discounted heavily, and you do lose outright value by discounting a module, but you gain it in volume. So in other words, do I sell one module at full price, or do I sell 6 or 7 at a discounted rate and then make up more in total revenue thanks to that volume of sales? So it's a very common sales technique. It's one that when I was working in retail, we did all the time, especially at certain points in the year when you've identified perhaps that sales levels typically drop off or there's something else going on. I worked in retail working for, a Canterbury clothing company, when they used to have the rugby teams, the national rugby teams, the All Blacks jerseys. And so if you had, say, a major game coming up or a test of some kind, doing a sale on the jerseys, if the parent company allowed it, was a good way of just increasing the volume of sales, right? Just made sense. So people would buy 2 jerseys instead of 1 or whatever else it was. And it's selling it around $100 and $150 a pop, taking a small percentage off was a good way of, again, increasing the revenue. You just make it up by sheer volume. And secondary sales as well. Hey, how about a scarf with that? How about a hat with that, right? So that's how you bundle things. Now, the other thing too is, speaking of egodynamics again, and the way the world works, in some parts of the world we're moving into autumn and winter, which, as I said last week, some people like to move indoors depending on the climate that is conducive to doing video games and flight sim activities. Although I have to say it's been unseasonably warm here in Minnesota. Unfortunately, I prefer the cold, and I do like winter, although it does take me, unfortunately, away a little bit from my biking activities, which I've had a couple of weeks off, unfortunately. I need to get back into that before the season does close. I haven't delved into fat biking yet. That's another thing. So now, I don't think the timing, therefore, of any of these improvements in sales by ED is sheer coincidence. Several YouTubers over the last few days have gotten their hands on access to limited portions of the brand new Microsoft Flight Simulator 2024, which is being touted by some commentators as the biggest flight sim ever created. I believe the launch date for that is in November. So the plans for the game include more eye candy, reduced download times and file sizes. Oh, and also support for multi-threading and more realistic physics modeling. That sounds kind of familiar, doesn't it? So as we've already seen, there is room in the flight sim ecosystem for both DCS World and Microsoft Flight Simulator. Because DCS World occupies a niche within the military simulation that the Microsoft Flight Simulator 2020 doesn't currently support. Indeed, one of the reasons for 2024's inception was the limitation of the game engine, which Microsoft and Asobo said they couldn't overcome with the things that they were hoping to do with it. So while ED has continued to tweak its rather old game engine, the former solution was to essentially redo the game engine, which obviously was prohibitive for egodynamics. And that gives you some idea of the scale of production and monetary investment available to Microsoft Flight Simulator, which ED can't hope to match. But it should also give you some idea of how much DCS World sort of punches above its weight in many respects, especially in the areas of highly detailed module physics and module systems, which we talked a little bit about just before with the Viper and the F-18, and also the replication of some weapons systems. And remember too, the destructible world environment that DCS offers, which Microsoft Flight Simulator does not. So at this time, combat has not been touted as a feature of Microsoft Flight Simulator 2024, with the team showcasing a lot more helicopter-based mission work recently, and a demand of that kind of work was from the player base looking to do more than just fly from point A to B. So they spent quite a lot of time showcasing that last year and the beginning of this year as they indicated what the game engine could sort of do. So it's interesting stuff. Now, as I said, the ecosystem appears to support both games, and indeed there is some, I think, portability between the two for players to hop seats. Remember that third-party developers like HeatBlue and India Foxed Echo teamed up for the Microsoft Flight Simulator version of the Tomcat, as is Flying Iron Simulations, who are working on the DCS A7E2. So that is a huge module that a lot of people are waiting for. So establishing a reputation within Microsoft Flight Simulator is not going to hurt ED with these third-party developers showcasing what they're capable of in both platforms, and therefore you get players players saying, okay, well, I'm flying the Tomcat in Microsoft Flight Simulator. Now I want to jump over and see what it can do in DCS World. Can I shoot some of the missiles, and can I land on the aircraft carrier, or that kind of stuff? So there is some healthy comparison between the two games. And again, I think that is not necessarily a bad thing for Eagle Dynamics. Now, there's no question with the explosion too of periphery equipment, which was boosted by Microsoft Flight Simulator's arrival, with estimates to the tune of billions in equipment sold around the world, with many companies focused on high-quality military replicas, highly suited to DCS World, of course, and also Microsoft Flight Simulator. Again, doesn't hurt DCS World. Now, on that topic, really quick, WINWING hinted, I think it was last week that I saw, at the possibility of a pending release of their force feedback stick. This is the Cyber Taurus 2, and I'm hoping to get my hands on one of these if WINWING will allow me before it gets officially released. We'll see what happens there. And there's no doubt curiosity will drag DCS players to at least take a look at Microsoft Flight Simulator 2024 and what it has to offer. I'm certainly in that camp. ED will be conscious of this, but the launch I don't think will be detrimental to them in the long term because of the spheres in which they exist, as we described. So in many respects, the early versions of Microsoft Flight Simulator 2020 actually didn't really deliver the graphical fidelity promised, nor the performance promises, even in the higher end systems of the times. At that time, we were talking 2080 systems, with regards to GPUs that you're going to need to get the best out of it. The reality is that even with our current PC tech, which has grown since then, building worlds at scale in high fidelity with complex weather systems, shadows and lightings and other forms of physical effects have always been a strain on PC hardware and continue to do so. It induces limitations in performance at some level or another, and if you chuck in, well, a VR headset, the calculus changes again. So despite this, there's still tremendous promise in how far I think DCS World and ED can take the game, and games like Microsoft Flight Simulator can take us also in our virtual sim experiences. Overall, I think it's a positive thing to have both of these games within our grasp. Let me know what you think in the comment section below. That wraps up another DCS SITREP for this week. It's been a busy week for me, which required, unfortunately, a reinstall of DCS World last night, thanks to some experimentation I was doing with some new VR drivers, which might be the subject of a separate video once I get everything up and running. So I had some driver conflicts. I got that resolved last night. It was sort of a hangover as I bounced between PC systems rather quickly at the end of July, where the old PC toasted itself, and then I had to transfer SSDs over and get the game up and running again. So I've been pretty busy trying to get those issues sorted out, and I'm going to be busy, unfortunately, again, reconfiguring the flight controls and getting the game up and running again. In some ways, this will be a nice way to start with a clean slate and get some of the controls set up in a way that I actually want to, rather than sort of rushing to do it as a last resort, just to get something in the game for flying and recording and that kind of stuff. So yeah, it is what it is. And I wasn't, unfortunately, able to save all of the settings that I wanted to, just because of the way I had things set up. I had a lot of conflicts. That's my world. Thanks again for all the support last week with the subscriptions and things as we dive back into the SITREPs proper after a little hiatus there. Comments, likes, subscriptions, and all of that help the channel chug along in an increasingly crowded YouTube environment right now around flight simulation and DCS World. I'll see you next time on the DCS SITREP, likely with commentary on this latest patch, which I'm excited about. We'll see you next time. Cheers.